This video is all about the biography of Edgar Allan Poe and the analysis of his work, The Raven. This video will also include some recommendation from Poe's amazing works.
So this is the biography of Edgar Allan Poe. Edgar Allan Poe was born on January 19, 1809 in Boston. Edgar never really knew his biological parents, Elizabeth Arnold Poe, a British actor, and David Poe Jr., also an actor who was born in Baltimore. His father left the family early in Edgar's life, and his mother died of tuberculosis when he was only 2. He was separated from his brother William and her sister Rosalie. Poe went to live with his foster parents, John and Frances Allan, in Richmond, Virginia. John was a successful tobacco merchant there. Edgar and Franz seemed to form a bond, but he had more difficult relationship with John. By the age of 13, Poe was a prolific poet, but his literary talents were discouraged by his headmaster and by John, who preferred that young Edgar follow him in the family business. But but Poe preferred poetry over profits. Poe reportedly wrote poems on the back of some of Allan's business papers. Money was also an issue between Poe and John. Poe went to the University of Virginia in 1826, where he excelled in his classes. However, he didn't receive enough money from John to cover all of his costs. Poe turned to gambling to cover the differences, but ended up in debt. He returned home only to face another personal setback. His neighbor and fiancée Sarah Elmira Roster had become engaged to someone else. Heartbroken and frustrated, Poe moved to Boston. In 1827, around the time he published his first book, Poe joined the U.S. Army. 2 years later, he learned that his mother, Frances, was dying of tuberculosis. But by the time he returned to Richmond, she had already died. While in Virginia, Poe and his father briefly made peace with each other, and John helped Poe to get an appointment to the United States Military Academy at West Point. Poe excelled at his studies at West Point, but he was kicked out after a year for his poor handling of his duties. During his time at West Point, Poe had fought with John, who had remarried without telling him. Some have speculated that Poe intentionally sought to be expelled to spite his father, who eventually cut ties with Poe. After leaving West Point, Poe published his third book and focused on writing full-time. He traveled around in search of opportunity, living in New York City, Baltimore, Philadelphia, and Richmond. In 1834, John Allan died, leaving Poe out of his will, but providing for an illegitimate child Allan had never met. Poe, who continued to struggle living in poverty, got a break when one of his short stories won a contest in Baltimore's Saturday Visitor. He began to publish more short stories, and in 1835 he landed as an editorial position with the Southern Literary Messenger in Richmond. Poe developed a reputation as a cutthroat critic, writing vicious reviews of his contemporaries. His scathing critics earned him the nickname the Tomahawk Man. His tenure at the magazine proved that short. However, Poe's aggressive reviewing style and sometimes combative personality strained his relationship with the publication, and he left the magazine in 1837. His problems with alcohol also played a role in his departure, according to some reports. Poe went to brief stints to Burton's Gentleman's Magazine, Graham's Magazine, as well as the Broadway Journal, and he also sold his work to Alexander Weekly Messenger, among other journals. In 1844, Poe moved to New York City. There, he published a news story in the New York Sun about balloon trip across the Atlantic Ocean that he later revealed to be a hoax. His stunt grabbed attention, but it was his publication of the Raven in 1845 that made Poe a literary sensation. That same year, Poe found himself under attack for his stinging criticism of fellow poet Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. Poe claimed that Longfellow, a widely popular and literary figure, was a plagiarist, which resulted in a backlash against Poe. Despite his success and popularity as a writer, Poe continued to struggle financially, and he advocated for higher wages for writers and an international copyright law. Poe self-published his first book, Tamerlane and Other Poems, in 1827. His second poetry collection, Al-Araf, Tamerlane, and Minor Poems, was published in 1829. As a critic at the Southern Literary Messenger in Richmond from 1835 to 1837, Poe published some of his works in the magazine, including two parts of his only novel, the narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym. Later on came poems such as Ulalum and the Bells, also the Raven, which is the Poe's poem The Raven, published in 1845 in the New York Evening Mirror, is considered among the best-known poems in American literature and one of the best Poe's career. An unknown narrator laments the demise of his great love Lenore and is visited by a raven, who insistently repeat one word, nevermore. In the work, which consists of 18 six-line stanzas, Poe explored some of his common themes, death and loss.
Edgar Allan Poe was a master of the macabre. He wrote horror, he wrote poetry, criticism, fiction, mystery. He was a master of suspense.
Edgar Allan Poe, called by many the father of the detective story, was born on January 19, 1809, in Boston, Massachusetts.
When Poe was 2 years old, his mother passed away, and his father had already abandoned the family. He was taken in as a foster child by the Allan family.
He was writing poetry from about the time that he was 13. He kept writing all the time. He worked very, very hard at his writing and wrote constantly.
In 1826, Poe enrolled at the University of Virginia. He went into debt, he gambled to try to pay off those debts and found himself in even greater debt and ultimately had to withdraw from the university. In 1830, Poe enrolled at West Point.
After West Point, Poe turned to writing full-time and lived in a number of East Coast cities before settling down in Richmond, Virginia.
Edgar Allan Poe secretly married his 13-year-old cousin, and then in 1836 publicly married her in a more open ceremony.
He loved her very, very much. They lived together always until, alas, she died of tuberculosis when she was, I guess, around 20.
Poe's primary occupation as a writer was as a literary critic. He worked at several newspapers and literary magazines, and he had quite a reputation for being a harsh critic. One of his editors called him the Tomahawk Man.
During his lifetime, he barely made a living from his writing.
Poe published some of his most famous short stories in his 1840 collection, Tales of the Grotesque and Arabesque.
He wrote some of his stories using the first person and talking about the use of opium, so people assumed that he dabbled in drugs. The stories were so creepy, they were ghost stories taken to such a brilliant extreme that people thought he had to be a little strange himself.
Poe invented detective fiction when he wrote The Murders in the Rue Morgue in 1841.
Murders in the Rue Morgue really deserves to be called the first detective story. It started the whole tradition of detective fiction.
The Raven, which was published in 1845, was his huge breakthrough. It became a big bestseller.
Poe's career very much went up and down until he really hit The Raven. And that poem was known by, it seems everyone in the world. It had an enormous press.
On October 7, 1849, Edgar Allan Poe died at the age of 40 under mysterious circumstances.
Poe's death may be one of the most bizarre things about his life. He left Virginia on his way to New York, disappeared. A week later, he was found on the streets of Baltimore.
We don't have a single piece of information about what he was doing. At the end of that week, he was found in a tavern, ill, drunk, and was taken to a hospital.
It turned out he was wearing clothes that didn't belong to him, and a couple of days later he died in a delirium. Nobody knows exactly what killed him.
Edgar Allan Poe's legacy in American literature is very detectable in all of the mystery dramas and stories we have, and all the kind of horror and vampire work that we see, that there is that trace of the sort of horror and mystery that Poe really was able to harness in his writing.
Poe is an American icon. I think he's more than a writer.
Even today, more than 150 years after he died, everybody loves Edgar Allan Poe.
The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe. Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered weak and weary over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore, while I nodded, nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping, as of someone gently rapping at my chamber door. "'Tis some visitor," I muttered, tapping at my chamber door, "only this and nothing more." Distinctly I remember, it was in the bleak December, and each separate dying ember wrought its ghost upon the floor. Eagerly I wished the morrow, vainly I had sought to borrow from my books surcease of sorrow, sorrow for the lost Lenore, for the rare and radiant maiden, whom the angels name Lenore, nameless here forevermore. And the silken, sad, uncertain rustling of each purple curtain thrilled me, filled me with fantastic terrors never felt before, so that now, to still the beating of my heart, I stood repeating, "'Tis some visitor, entreating entrance at my chamber door, some late visitor, entreating entrance at my chamber door. This it is, and nothing more." Presently my soul grew stronger, hesitating then no longer. "Sir," said I, or "Madam, truly your forgiveness I implore, but the fact is, I was napping, and so gently you came rapping, and so faintly you came tapping at my chamber door, that I scarce was sure I heard you. Here I opened wide the door, darkness there, and nothing more." Deep into the darkness peering, long I stood there wondering, fearing, doubting, dreaming dreams no mortals ever dared to dream before. But the silence was unbroken, and the stillness gave no token, and the only word there spoken was the whisper word, Lenore. This I whispered, and an echo murmured back the word, Lenore. Merely this, and nothing more. Back into the chamber turning, all my soul within me burning. Soon again I heard a tapping, somewhat louder than before. Surely, said I, surely that is something at my window lattice. Let me see then what thereat is, and this mystery explore. Let my heart be still a moment, and this mystery explore. This the wind, and nothing more. Open here I flung the shutter, when, with many a flirt and a flutter, in there stepped a stately raven of the saintly days of yore. Not the least obeisance made he, not a minute stopped or stayed he, but with mine of lord or lady, perched above my chamber door, perched upon a vast of palace just above my chamber door, perched and sat and nothing more. Then this ebony bird, beguiling my sad fancy into smiling, by the grave and stern decorum of the countenance it wore. Though thy crest be shorn and shaven, thou, I said, art sure no craven, ghastly grim and ancient raven, wandering from the nightly shore. Tell me, what thy lordly name is on the night's Plutonian shore? Quoth the raven, nevermore. Much I marvel this ungainly fowl to hear discourse so plainly, though its answer little meaning, little relevancy bore. For we cannot help agreeing that no living human being ever yet was blessed with seeing bird above his chamber door, bird or beast upon a sculptured bust above his chamber door, with such name as Nevermore. But the raven, sitting lonely on the placid past, spoke only that one word, as if his soul in that one word he did outpour. Nothing further than he uttered, not a feather than he fluttered, till I scarcely more than muttered, other friends have flown before, on the morrow he will leave me, as my hopes have flown before. Then the bird said, Nevermore. Startled at the stillness broken by reply so aptly spoken, doubtless, said I, what it utters is its only stock and store, caught from some unhappy master whom unmerciful disaster followed fast and followed faster, till his songs one burden love, till the dirges of his hope that melancholy burden bore of nevermore. But the raven still beguiling all my fancy into smiling, straight I wheeled the cushioned seat in front of bird, and passed in door. Then upon the velvet sinking, I betook myself to linking fancy unto fancy, thinking what this ominous bird of yore, what this grim, ungainly, ghastly, gaunt, and ominous bird of yore meant in croaking nevermore. These I sat engaged in guessing, but no syllable expressing, to the fowl whose fiery eyes now burned into my bosom's core. This and more I sat divining, with my head at ease reclining, on the cushion's velvet lining that the lamplight gloated o'er, but whose velvet violet lining with the lamplight gloating o'er, she shall press, nevermore. Then methought the air grew denser, perfume from an unseen censer, swung by seraphim whose footfalls tinkled on the tufted floor. Wretch, I cried, thy God had lent thee, by this angel he had sent thee, respite, and nepenthe from thy memories of Lenore. Quaff, oh quaff, this kind nephthys, and forget this lost Lenore. Quoth raven, nevermore. Prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still, if bird or devil, whether tempter sent or whether tempest tossed thee here ashore, desolated, all undaunted, on this desert land enchanted, on this home by horror haunted. Tell me truly, I implore, is there balm in Gilead? Tell me, I implore, quoth the raven, nevermore. Prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still, if bird or devil, by that heaven that bends above us, by that God we both adore, tell this soul with sorrow laden, if within the distant Eden, it shall clasp a sainted maiden, whom the angel named Lenore, clasp a rare and radiant maiden, whom the angels named Lenore, quoth the raven, nevermore. Be that word or sign in parting, bird or fiend, I shriek upstarting, get thee back into the tempest and the night's Plutonian shore. Leave no black plume as a token of that lie thy soul hath spoken. Leave my loneliness unbroken. Quit the bust above my door. Take thy beak from out my heart and take thy form from off my door. Quoth the raven, nevermore. And the raven, never fleeting, still is sitting on the pallid past of palace just above my chamber door. And his eyes have all the seeming of a demon's that is dreaming, and the lamplight o'er him streaming throws his shadow on the floor. And my soul from out that shadow that lies floating on the floor shall be lifted nevermore. The Raven is a narrative poem by Edgar Allan Poe. It was first published in 1845. It is considered one of Poe's most famous and influential works. The poem tells the story of a man who is visited by a talking raven, which ultimately drives him to despair. The poem begins with the narrator who is mourning the loss of his beloved Lenore. As he sits in his chamber, reading to distract himself from his grief, he hears a tapping at his door. He opens it to find nothing there, but when he hears a tapping on his window, he opens it, and only to find a raven perched on the bast of palace above his chamber door. The narrator asks the raven its name, to which it responds only the word nevermore. The narrator then begins to ask the raven question, to which the raven always responds the word nevermore. The narrator becomes increasingly agitated, and then the raven's nevermore becomes a hunting refrain that echoes in his despair. In the end, the narrator resigns himself to the raven's presence, realizing that he will never be able to escape from his grief. The Raven is a dark and hunting poem that explores themes of loss, grief, and the human conditions. It is renowned for its intricate rhyme scheme and its use of repetition. You can see that while reading the poem Raven, you can see the repetition, the repeated phrase or word that was used by Edgar Allan Poe. And also symbolism like the raven, the nevermore that the raven always respond, and a lot more. So alliteration also, you can see that in the poem. The poem's impact has been profound, influencing countless writers and artists, and it remains one of Poe's most celebrated and enduring works. So The Raven was one of the most famous work of Edgar Allan Poe. It was the first book that he published that made him known as a writer or as a writer. The Raven is a narrative poem written in a first-person point of view. It personifies an overwhelming feeling of sorrow and mourning, while other symbols in the poem amplifies further the dramatic atmosphere that underscores the protagonist's profound sense of loss. The poem delves into the emotional battles individuals face in various facets of life, particularly the internal struggle to manage emotion, and especially emotions associated with grief and bereavement. Even though these battles are not physical, they nevertheless cause bruising and scarring. Poe has created a fantastic work of literature that speaks to the emotion and experiences of each and every reader who comes across it. So, if any one of you would really love reading, then you should really read The Raven. This poem has 18 stanzas with 6 lines. Throughout the poem, it uses a trochaic octameter, a very distinctive metrical form. He uses the first person point of view, just like what I've said, throughout, and a very consistent rhyme scheme of A, B, C, B, B, B. There are a large number of words that use the same ending. For example, the or in Lenore and nevermore is an apostrophe is also present, or the repetition of the same word at the end of multiple lines. So I noticed that the tapping of the sound was really emphasized in the poem. Poe really emphasized the tapping of the sound. It was mentioned in the first verse, and was first stanza, then it was mentioned again in the following stanza, because the first one was when he opened the door, and the second one is when he opened the window, and then after that he saw a talking raven. And then a raven is a black one, right? So and then he only responded to one word, which is nevermore. So this really built in the story's genre. That's gonna be a thriller, or it's gonna be a horror, I guess, because that's where Edgar Allan Poe's known for in writing that type of genre. And also at the latter end, the protagonist of the poem, the word nevermore become like a hunting words to him, that he thinks that the bird, the raven, was a devil, an evil creature. So yeah, Edgar Allan Poe is famous for his poems and short stories. He is also the inventor, considered to be the inventor of detective genres, and also contributor to the science fiction genre. So the works of Poe that we would like to recommend are the Telltale Heart, a short story about a murderer who is hunted by the sound of his victim's heartbeat. So that also is a good work of Poe. And then another one is The Fall of the House of Usher, a gothic tale about a man who visits his friend's decaying ancestral home and experiences supernatural occurrences. And another one would be The Murders in the Rue Morgue. So that one is also one of his famous work. It's all about it's considered to be the first modern detective story. It features the fictional detective C. Auguste Dupin solving a gruesome double murder. And also The Black Cat, a story about a man who is driven to murder by his pet cat. And there's a lot more, but yeah, these are just few examples of Poe's vast body of work, which often explores themes of death, madness, and supernatural. His writing is known for his dark and macabre atmosphere, intricate writings, and vivid imagery. So, yeah.